Good morning. Welcome back here at ECCMID TV, brought live to you here from Pavilion 1 at the ECCMID Congress Center in Lisbon, Portugal. My name is Judith Cohen, and I am still your host during these ECCMID TV broadcasts. And I'm very pleased to be introducing my next guest to you all, Professor Evelina Tacconelli. Excuse me. Welcome, Evelina. Happy to have you here in the studio. You are the Director of Infectious Diseases at the Verona University Hospital in Italy, and you are one of this year's ECCMID keynote lecturers. I believe your keynote lecture was on Monday, this past Monday, and it was on advances in clinical antibacterial resistance research. I hear it has been well attended. Would you care to share a little bit more insight on what was discussed during your keynote lecture, especially for our viewers who didn't have the opportunity to attend? Can you tell us a little bit about the lecture?
Yes, sure. It was really an honor to give a lecture, keynote lecture at ECCMID this year, and I also appreciated a lot this year. We had a new format.
Yep.
So this was a scientific interview,
indeed.
And it was great because obviously it was more difficult to deliver messages because you do not have slides, and I have to say probably we are a bit now lot too much depending on what we see instead of what we hear.
Yeah.
And so we are so used that without any nice color or message, you don't get the real final message. That I think that was a bit risky. On the other side, gave the opportunity, because we had only two, so I was to the other one, the one from the Professor Alison Holmes, gave the possibility to know a little bit better the people, and not only the scientific message. So I think it's also a good chance to get to understand what moves some scientists to do what they do, and maybe can be also a bit pushing who has some doubt, or maybe some female, for example, who has some doubts if they can have together career and family.
Yeah.
So I think that was a great experience. There was a lot of interaction. And main message, I mean, there were several messages that we discussed during that talk. I think the most important is we need to change a bit the way we look at antimicrobial resistance.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we are talking about antimicrobial resistance since years.
Yeah.
But
it's always a hot topic. Yeah.
It's always a top topic, so there is something wrong. So my example was why at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, when the first cases were in some regions and not in others, and maybe some countries they had more deaths, unfortunately, than others, then everybody in the community, in the scientific community, but also the media, was trying to say why people in Italy should die more than in Sweden, or why people in US should get one specific drug before. So there was this idea that today we can afford a sort of equity in healthcare. And COVID was demonstrating that maybe there is not such equity, and everybody was standing up and saying that's unacceptable. I mean, in Europe, everybody should have the same chance to get a drug or to be cured. And antimicrobial resistance is indeed that. So there is such a different rate in the risk that each citizen has to die for antimicrobial resistant infection, that why we do accept it. So my example was if I'm 55 years old man and I'm waiting for a transplantation of the liver since 10 years, 5 years, and it's now my moment. And so that's really the most important time for me and the surgeon. And then if I get this intervention in Italy or in Greece, my risk that organ transplantation is just a failure is high, because I have a risk to get a very difficult to treat infection. If I have the same transplantation in Oslo, the risk is less. So why nobody is reacting? So why we accept as normal? It's not normal. So antimicrobial resistance is indeed a failure for the medical community, and should be regarded as quality indicator for the hospital. That was, from my point of view, the main message there.
Yeah. And you also discussed different advances that are being made in research. Is that also addressing this specific important message?
Yes, so because we discuss also that it's very important, obviously, if you want to produce new drugs or you want to produce different diagnostic, you need to understand, first of all, how much is the burden of that disease.
Yeah.
And we understand now that we are strongly underestimating that burden because we have data only from high-income country, single center, retrospective, so really low quality level data. And there is this very important piece of literature just came out from the Global Burden Disease Group, and they demonstrated that today the place in the world suffering more is Western Sub-Saharan Africa, and the one less suffering is Australia. And people are dying a lot for lower respiratory tract infection. And this means that they not only new drugs, but we need also more vaccination. And so the countries suffering more are those where hygiene, poverty, and vaccination are not so spread all over the countries.
Yeah, so you took the whole antimicrobial resistance question much broader, I think, than just focusing on the basic fundamental research on resistance, but really into the ethical discussions around it. And
yeah, I'm very happy. You understood, I mean, you use a word now that is ethic. And you understood that in 5 minutes less of this interview, so I think this is great. And we cannot convince the doctor that antimicrobial resistance is an ethical problem. It's an ethical problem because it's having an impact on myself, but will have an impact for my children, for the people living in the future.
Absolutely.
Because as more mistake we do now, as worse will be for the future. And so that's a very, very important message.
Well, I'm glad you came here to our TV studio to get that across. Thank you so much for coming here and giving us this extra insight, especially for us who didn't manage to visit or attend your keynote lecture, which will be on demand available also because this year's Congress is still hybrid. So thank you very much for coming here.
My pleasure.
Evelina. Thank you all for tuning in. We will be back at the clock of noon, and we will be back with our lucky wheel of fortune. So please enter via the Zoom links. You can find them all around the ESCMID World Village or online on the platform. And come into my studio and let's see if we can win you some really cool ESCMID or ECCMID limited edition gadget prizes. So hope to see you again here back at ECCMID TV at noon. See you then.